taking it in his stride.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Carl Sisson, and I'm privileged to serve as the VP for Advancement and External Engagement for Houghton College. And one of the things that gives me the privilege of doing is representing Houghton College in other areas of the country and connecting with key alumni. And on my most recent visit to Denver, post-pandemic, I had the privilege of getting together downtown with Stephen Woolsey from the class of 2008 for breakfast. And it was a really good breakfast, by the way. He recommended this. And Stephen works and lives in downtown Denver. And in the course of that conversation, I said, hey, he's a Houghton boy. When are you coming home next? And I would love for you to connect with our students. So he said, I will let you know. We worked it out, we figured it out. So we have lots of Woolsey family members in the room, for which I'm grateful. So I welcome you. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a brief introduction so you get an idea of who Stephen is. So he's a lawyer and a musician. He currently serves with the Colorado Attorney General's Office as an Assistant Attorney General, and in that role he advises state agencies on labor and employment matters, litigates employment disputes, and prosecutes civil rights cases. And before joining the office in 2020, he worked for several small and mid-sized firms in Denver. While he was here at Houghton, Stephen majored in business and minored in music. He played men's soccer, performed as a singer-songwriter, and interned at John Mayer's record label in Chicago. After graduation, he lived and worked in Buffalo for 5 years before moving to Colorado to attend the University of Denver Stern College of Law. While he was in law school, Stephen worked as a part-time clerk for several firms, interned with the SEC, and wrote on the school's flagship law review. He received his Juris Doctor, passed the bar exam, and began practicing law in 2016. In 2019, Stephen's appellate advocacy led to favorable published decisions from the Colorado Court of Appeals and the Colorado Supreme Court. And he was recently recognized by his peers in 2021 as one of the best lawyers, ones to watch, for his work in employment litigation. So it's my privilege tonight from the class of 2008 to welcome Stephen Woolsey.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm honored to be asked to speak a little bit about my experience as a lawyer in Denver, and as a singer as well, and sort of the path that got me from Houghton College in 2008 to Denver, Colorado in 2022. So first, need to make a caveat. Nothing I say should be construed as an opinion or a view of the Colorado Attorney General's Office. I'm here in my own capacity. So if that isn't clear from the title, it should be clear now. So I grew up in Western New York, in the Finger Lakes area, and started attending Houghton in 2004. I played men's soccer for several years. I sang in choir and more frequently sang around campus at Java 101 and in this room and downstairs, pretty much everywhere on campus. And it was a lot of fun. And I miss the days when I could just write a song and record it quickly, send it to, a bunch of college friends, and a few days later perform it for them at a show. I don't have that level of flexibility and quick turnaround and feedback that I used to have, but I had a lot of fun at Houghton, and I think one of the main things that my Houghton experience taught me was, I guess it sounds a little cliche, but how to learn on my own, and how to think about problems from different angles, and engage in self-directed study. So I graduated in 2008. That was a significant year for the country and probably for the world. About 2 months after I graduated, the market crashed and the Great Recession started, which was not a great time to be looking for a job when you don't have any experience. So It was a frustrating couple of years. I worked a lot of odd jobs, a lot of retail jobs, call center. I talked a lot with Dan Noyes, who's still here today, and he put me in contact with Chuck Massey, which led to me being in AmeriCorps for a year in Buffalo, and then I worked for an IT company, Ingram Micro, which was a great company to work for. I did business development there for a few years, and while I was working there, I sort of started reconsidering what it is I wanted to do with my career and what I wanted out of a career and day-to-day sort of work life. And I started considering several different options. Around the same time, I was obviously frustrated with my experience of trying to find a job, and at the heart of it was ultimately curious about why the recession happened in the first place. What led to it? How did we get to where we are? And that curiosity led me to an interest in economics and finance, which I do none of that now. So, but the point was that it got me interested in some other things that I wasn't interested in when I was attending Houghton, and started opening my eyes to some different career choices. I sort of reached the conclusion that I needed to find a career path that would be rewarding, constant learning, that I felt like I would be challenged, that would present interesting problems to solve on a regular basis. And I think maybe my parents suggested law, I'm not sure. I know I was talking with them quite a bit at the time, and for better or worse, the topic of law came up, and here I am today. So in 2012, I decided that I would attend law school, and I started looking at schools, and in 2013, I enrolled in University of Denver Law School and moved to Colorado, sight unseen. I'd never been to the state before, so it was certainly a big decision to make with relatively little information, but it was. I viewed it as an investment in myself and a risk and an opportunity to sort of create my own path in a new place. So I moved to Denver, and within days of getting there, I was so thrilled with the environment that I deep down, I felt like I could probably stay there for a while. I attended law school. Law school wasn't easy, but it was fun. I think one of my favorite parts of the experience was being surrounded by other people who were interested in similar types of problems and similar issues to me. One of the common cliches that they throw around at law school orientation is look to your left, look to your right. Your peers are going to be the people who you're either arguing cases before because they became a judge, or they're going to be the next politician, or they're going to be business owners. The important thing is your peers will be movers and shakers, and you should take the opportunity to develop the relationships you can in law school so that down the road you can rely on that and continue to grow your network, and you're not just someone who wants to make a connection to increase their LinkedIn connections count. So at the end of the day, I ended up writing under the law review. I did a number of internships and clerkships at local firms. I really was trying to get as much practical experience as I could, because generally speaking, that's something that going to law school doesn't give you, is practical experience. It's usually a lot of theory, a lot of coursework, but it doesn't teach you the nuts and bolts of actually being a lawyer that you learn on the job after law school. And I wanted to try to hit the ground running, so I just tried to take any job that would give me what I thought would be useful experience. And eventually I made my way to an internship at the SEC, which was sort of a crazy full circle moment for me, part of the reason I went to law school is because I was interested in finance and economics, and I had gotten into the books by Michael Lewis, Liar's Poker, and Moneyball, and he's very good at writing about Wall Street issues and making them accessible to people, and so I loved his books, and I was interested in the SEC before I wanted to be a lawyer, and then 2 years into law school I was interning at the SEC, which just seemed like crazy that could happen in such a short period of time, but it was also a lot of fun. One thing that taught me was that I do not want to practice securities law, or at least I don't right now. The concept of it was more fun than the day-to-day work. And so when I graduated from law school, I didn't have a firm idea of what type of law I wanted to practice. But I felt fairly confident that if I could just get a job with a local firm and start getting experience practicing law, I would have a better sense of where to spend my time and energy. And ultimately, I worked for a small firm in Denver after law school for about 3 years. And essentially, because that firm employed some really top-notch employment experts, I became an employment lawyer. And I didn't take a single employment law class in law school. Much of what I do today is in the area of administrative law, which was one of my worst classes in law school. So it's ironic. Your performance in school doesn't necessarily correlate to what you will succeed and excel at later. And most of my work today for the Attorney General's office is in the area of administrative law. So, go figure. The main thing I want to convey today is I've done a lot of talking about being a lawyer or how I got here. I'm also a musician, as Carl mentioned, and I love to sing. I love to play guitar and write songs. I've been doing that much longer than I've been a lawyer, and I'm probably better at that than I am at being a lawyer, but there's a lot of crossover for me anyway between practicing law, because a lot of practicing law is writing, and making music. I don't hate attention. I like standing in front of people, like that since I was little. I think when I was a little kid, I used to pretend to play guitar and put on fake concerts for my parents, that sort of thing. I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but a lot of what I do in my practice involves either presenting arguments in written or oral form, and sometimes standing in front of judges, or more than one judge, and trying to persuade them that my interpretation of the law is correct and someone else's isn't. So I've had some success in that area, and it's something that I find really fulfilling, but it's not something that I would want to do if I wasn't also continuing to do music. So the two, I think, feed each other. I think being a musician makes me a better lawyer. I'm not sure that being a lawyer makes me a better musician, come to think of it, but certainly the other way around, and both disciplines offer an opportunity to craft sentences, words, lines, work with the written word, which is something that I increasingly enjoy, and law isn't always easy. A lot of what a lawyer does can be fairly characterized as monotonous at times. There's a lot of reading dense legal material that under normal circumstances would put most people to sleep, but it's part of the job, and one of the perks of doing that is that eventually you get to argue in court, and you get to try to actually put all the things you've been working on together and present a compelling argument. If a common interview question, I think, is, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 10 years? And to be honest, I would never have predicted that I was going to be a lawyer. And even when I was in law school, I wouldn't have predicted that I was going to be a government lawyer. But I started in the private sector, and I got some experience in different law firm environments, understanding how people work and really learning one key takeaway, which is that the legal profession is really broad, and it offers a lot of flexibility, and there's a lot of ways of doing things right that aren't necessarily the same. You can approach problems from several different angles. And so one of my main takeaways from the experience was, there's a lot of ways of practicing employment law, there's a lot of ways of practicing civil rights law, and no one way is necessarily the right way. There are certain aspects of the practice of law that are, uniformly right and wrong, in the sense that you have ethical obligations to your clients and to the court, to the public, but in terms of how you practice, your tone, your argument style, your approach to strategy, and all those things, there's a lot of flexibility and room for you to come up with your own style, which that is something that I really appreciate. And so I love being a lawyer. I love my job. I've never been happier with a job than I am right now. And I will totally concede that working in government is very, very different than working for a firm. But it fits me, and I love my coworkers, and so it's a choice that I'm happy with. I think the decision to go to law school and become a lawyer is a choice that, it's a difficult choice because law school is incredibly expensive, and it's one of those choices that you should think carefully about. If you're inclined to make it, you shouldn't do it on a whim. You should do it because, of reasons you can identify. But if you've thought about it, I think investing in yourself is a very wise use of your time and resources. And for me, law school was hard, but it was great fun. Very early on in law school, an old mentor from the tech company I worked for, a former lawyer for that company, told me to sort of relish the work, relish the process of learning as much as you can about each subject, because sometimes the natural inclination can be, what's the minimum I need to learn to get a good grade and move on to the next course. And I guess I didn't always follow that advice, but I mostly followed that advice, and I think he's right. Part of the fun of being a lawyer is enjoying the process of becoming one, and enjoying the process of developing and becoming, a more experienced and seasoned advocate. There are a lot of different types of law. I practice in one or two small, very narrow areas, but there are a ton of options. They don't all involve going to trial. In fact, very few of them involve moments that you see on television in shows like Boston Legal and Suits. Actually, nothing from Suits is accurate. But the main point is, in order to get to situations like those that you see on TV, which are fairly rare, a ton of work has to go into setting up a case and learning about a client and frankly becoming a lawyer to begin with. And so they focus on the flashy things and take some creative liberties, but I think we all, the people who want to be lawyers, and certainly the people who grew up being told that they were good at arguing, like me, I think hope that someday they can go into a courtroom and deliver some sort of compelling speech to a jury and change hearts and minds and, score one for the good guy. So I have yet to argue in front of a jury, but hopefully someday soon that will happen. And I'm sure I will be very nervous when it does, but it will be fun, and each time you do it, I think it'll probably get a little bit easier. So that's sort of an overview. I have a tendency of just sort of going off on tangents, so at this point I'm going to just encourage any of you, if you have any questions or thoughts, comments, ideas, please feel free to raise your hand. Just for my own benefit, how many people here are students? Okay, and how many of you are thinking about law as a potential career choice? All right. If I can pick on you for a second, what interests you about being a lawyer?
I'd probably be interested in like patent law. I'm kind of taking some engineering courses, and I thought that'd be a good transition into it. But that's really as far as I am right now.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I know almost nothing about patent law, but that's just, I think, more a statement to how broad the law is. And just because you're not interested in one thing doesn't mean you don't want to be a lawyer, or it's just not a good fit for you. I think I have several friends who are in patent law, and they love their work. So, and I feel fairly confident saying that an engineering background certainly helps in patent law. So, I think it's something that's sought after in the legal community.
Didn't you say earlier today, if someone was an engineer and had their law degree, they would have their choice of opportunities?
I mean, I don't know a law firm, so I can't make that guarantee, but I can tell you that I've heard from lots of IP lawyers over the years that an engineering background or some sort of technical background like that is pretty sought after, because it's rare that lawyers know how to do that stuff. They usually have to rely on other people, experts, to come in and educate them so that they can make a case about something technical. And I think there's value in being able to do that yourself, certainly. I'm sure firms see it that way as well. I think since there are so few potential lawyers in the room, and who knows, because you could all change your minds, after this really sweeping talk. But I think there are some things I've learned over the years that probably translate into other disciplines and careers as well. One of those things is the importance of developing good habits early. Especially in the law, there's a lot of different tasks and processes you have to go through that are repetitive, and there's not always a strict deadline or timeline for getting things done. And if, for example, tracking your time, lawyers evaluate the amount of work they've done by the amount of time it took them to do it. They bill on a tenth of an hour schedule, or every 6 minutes. And something that a lot of lawyers, not all lawyers, but many lawyers have to do every single day, it just becomes second nature, is keeping track of your time, writing down how long you spent on this and that. And it sounds tedious. If you get into the habit early of keeping track the moment that you do something and just making a note then, as opposed to just trying to figure it out at the end of the day or at the end of the week or month, you will save yourself so much time and stress. But a lot of people know that they can wait to the end of the month to do that, and so they take really rough notes and then don't think twice about it until, there's 2 days left, and then they have to spend hours and hours trying to put their time together, and you can miss time that way. It's not the most accurate way of keeping track of what you've done, and you can end up underselling yourself because you're really sort of generalizing and summarizing based on your recollection of what happened rather than, taking a note. So one habit that I tried to take on really early was just keeping track of time. Like the second I do something, I write it down, and it's made my life so much easier, even though the initial work of doing that and developing the habit was a pain and was annoying. I didn't like it. I still don't like it, but I'm glad that I developed the habit of doing that, because if I had waited until a few years in to learn that lesson, I would have gotten less work done, because I'd spent so much of it trying to keep track of my time. So, that's maybe not the best illustration, but I think there are habits you can form. I mean, it's certainly true of music, it's true of sports. Focusing on the fundamentals early so that you don't have to worry about those things when you start getting into the more finessed and complicated and difficult problems. And so I think that's a good first starting point. And I would also say, for me personally, both in music and in law, mentors have been an enormous help in giving me perspective on my career, helping me make tough decisions, and giving me a gut check about whether I'm totally in my head about something or whether I am on the right track. I've had mentors in music, mentors in law school, and afterwards as well, and it's something that I sort of prioritize when I get into a new job. But, I think the flip side of that is maintaining relationships in general involves more than just reaching out to someone, saying your name, getting their name, exchanging a business card, and walking away. Just as mentors are important, I think it's really important in the practice of law, and frankly, probably in most professions, to sort of nurture your network and really try to push yourself outside your comfort zone to meet new people, develop relationships that go beyond, I need a job and you run a firm, so let's talk. That can work, but if you want to increase your odds, it's better to sort of develop that relationship early so that you aren't only reaching out when you need something from someone. Another thing I've found, and at least this may be more specific to lawyers, is that there's no shortage of advice. Law students are bombarded with advice from everywhere, and lawyers love to give law students advice. And I think one important thing to remember is that the advice you get comes from someone with particular experiences who's in a particular situation. And they're not always thinking about, well, if I was in your shoes, what would I actually do? They're thinking, this is what I did in my career and this seemed to work, so this is the right way to do it. So I would just encourage you in life and in your careers and to try to place advice in the proper context. Try to remember that one person's experience, in a profession or in a career is not necessarily indicative of the only possible way of doing something. And I know for me, I've gotten so much advice over the years. A lot of it was good advice. A huge percentage of it just had no application to me whatsoever. It was just things that sound good to say that are technically true, but aren't really relevant to what I'm doing. And so I think, not getting bent out of shape just because one lawyer has an opinion about something is a really good thing to remember. And if I listened to every piece of advice I'd ever received about being a lawyer, I would probably still be in law school, just constantly changing my major, and I'd have $2 million in student loan debt. So, anyway, bringing it back, I think music and I think lawyering have more in common than initially meets the eye, and they both are very concerned with presenting to an audience. And I'm presenting to an audience right now. I have to take notes on, am I engaging you? Are you listening? Are you paying attention? Well, I have to do all those things in lawyering, and I have to do them when I'm performing a show as well. Same thing. It's just self-awareness, understanding how people are responding to you, having the emotional intelligence to adapt, and understand if you're getting through to someone are all really useful skills in general in life, and especially so in music and law. Yes, sir.
So, when Dr. Lipscomb came in and introduced as an English and writing professor, I heard you say, well, if I could do it over, that's the major I would have chosen because, and you felt that it actually lent very well to a career in law. So, only one student indicated an interest in law. Is it true that an attorney, someone who's interested in law school come from a variety of fields? What are the skills? what are the things that best prepare someone for law school, and who else should be considering it? Is there, you were a business major, for example. Yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, I was 3 years out of Houghton before it even occurred to me that law was an option and something I might be interested in. I think there's a lot of different ways, you know, not necessarily to get into the practice of law, but certainly to go to law school. And it's not unusual for, you know, a lot of my peers had worked for several years in things completely unrelated to law, and now they're successful lawyers. There were, of course, like a huge contingent of people who went immediately from undergrad studies to law school, and that's also an option. But I think that sometimes there's some value in having some experience, seeing what you like and don't like before you make a big decision like that. I did say that if I could go do it again, I probably would major in writing or English, you know, rather than business. Business was a great background for law. I don't feel that I was ill-prepared in any way. I was, you know, quite prepared, but I feel like writing is one of my favorite parts about being a lawyer. It's something I enjoy in general. I probably isn't surprised if I like being a songwriter and a lawyer. The common theme is writing, and I guess I would have loved to have studied it more in undergrad, but I just didn't know that I liked it as much as I do. So be open to newer interests, and yeah, life can take crazy paths. I think in terms of preparation, things you can do to prepare for law school, if you've already made the decision to go, I think, you know, talking to lawyers who are actually practicing, maybe even shadowing them for a day to see what their day-to-day is like, talking to a couple different people who practice law and not just one person. Those are all useful things. I think probably, you know, taking some pre-law courses, also a good idea. If anything, some of what you encounter in law school will seem a lot less foreign if you've taken a course on it before and you at least understand some of the fundamental concepts. And I think the other thing you can do is talk to your peers who have similar interests and you know, bounce ideas off each other. There's not one thing I think that like will uniquely prepare you for law school other than you know, being a competent writer and speaker. But those are things that you can develop in law school too, and certainly most of my formal writing instruction happened in law school. So, any other questions? Yes?
Yeah. Early in your talk, when you were talking about what you had liked about Houghton, you talked about the sort of built-in arts community here where you had peers that you could bounce your compositions off and that sort of thing. Do you have any advice for people about how you even partially replace that when you move into a new city or new situation?
Music has frequently been a way of meeting people that I wouldn't otherwise meet, or building relationships I wouldn't otherwise have, and that's certainly true in law school. When I moved to Denver, I started performing at a place downtown and started inviting my law school friends, and I didn't know if any of them would come, and an overwhelming number of them came repeatedly over and over again for the whole time I was in law school. I ended up playing about once a month, and it was just a really nice non-legal opportunity for people who are tired of talking about law all day to do something else with each other and be humans. And so even though most of the time I was performing and wasn't, you know, sort of mixing around with people, it was a lot of fun. I think one of the things, certainly in the practice of law, if you're not careful, it can take over your life. Some law jobs just sort of have ridiculous time commitments that you need to be really intentional with if you want to try to do anything else with your time. Those jobs tend to pay very well, but they will get their money's worth. And so I think if you have passions or interests aside from what you're sort of pursuing as a career, it's really important to keep nurturing them and keep investing energy in them, and not to resist the temptation to say, well, my career is so important that I should just forget these other things that I love. It isn't. The other things are important. They're part of what make you you. And I know that being a musician is something like, I can't just not make music. It would drive me nuts. I would become a less pleasant person at work, and I would be less interested in the work I'm doing. You gotta give your brain a chance to reset sometimes and refresh and get excited about other things so that you can recharge and then come back and focus again. And that's certainly something that's been true of my practice. You know, some of the jobs, I've worked some jobs where it was almost impossible to do any type of music, and that's not where I am now, and I'm not at those jobs anymore, so take from that what you will. Yes, sir?
Stephen, I've had the privilege of hiring lawyers to do different things. Some to practice law, but probably more to do things that were not practicing law. And I've liked it because the legal training lends itself to wide applicability. Could you talk a little bit about how the law school training could prepare you for careers and opportunities that don't involve practicing law?
Definitely. I think that's one of the biggest advantages of a law degree, is the flexibility. You certainly don't have to use a law degree to become a lawyer. You can use it for other things. And a lot of law schools now are focusing a lot of their energy on educating students about the other things you can use a law degree for, or things that will, a law degree will like position you better for. Writing generally, journalism, I think, politics, teaching. There are a lot of different applications that a law degree could come in handy with, because it sort of gives you fundamental skills in terms of communication and writing and analytical thinking, and not always just going with your gut instinct, but challenging your mode of thinking so that you can develop and grow. Those are all things that are useful in other professions. And one of the things that drew me to law was the hope that if I didn't like being a lawyer, I could still do some other things, and enjoy it. And I know that, if you want to work for the CIA, they hired a lot of lawyers, at least back in the day, and FBI too. I mean, there are a lot of things that don't require you to practice law. But if you have a law degree, you may have a leg up in the application or competition process. So, absolutely. Yes, Stephen.
Looking back at specifically your college years, maybe into high school, if you could do one thing differently, and it's not such, I'm not necessarily looking at, I would have taken this course or that course, but seeing sort of the trajectory of your life and where your interests are now, is there something, or maybe how the formation has occurred in your life to where you are now? And this is not asking you that, are you in any way dissatisfied with what you're doing? But is there something, one thing that you could have changed or done differently in your college years and maybe late high school years that you would just play it differently, or invest differently, or think about it differently?
It's a great question. There are probably a lot of things, but I think one thing I would do is I would try not to be as hard on myself early on in my career as I was on myself in those first few years right after college, and even in the last years of college. You can put a lot of pressure on yourself that sometimes is based on external things and sometimes it's entirely internal. And I think you need to try to cut yourself some slack from time to time. I was listening to a podcast the other day where Michael Lewis keeps coming up. Michael Lewis and Ira Glass from This American Life were talking about, both very accomplished writers, that were talking about how when they read their early work now, they're appalled at some of the sentences they managed to come up with that just don't make any sense at all. And some decisions, creative decisions they made that just like, with the benefit of experience, they wouldn't have made again. But I think the main takeaway from their discussion was, we found our way. And I think being really hard on yourself at the beginning can sometimes be a temptation, but I don't think it's always productive, and I don't think it necessarily results in the best work. It's sometimes cutting yourself some slack, and that's one reason why I think mentors are important. If you can find a mentor who's gone through some of the same things you have, they may be able to share some perspective with you that you don't need to worry about this as much as you're worrying about it. And I think, had I had, a mentor tell me that in college, or if I had been a little more aware at the time, I think hopefully I would have been a little kinder to myself and wouldn't have blamed myself so much for, struggling to find a job when there were no jobs. So, yeah. Yeah.
Is there a class that you took, it could be in business or music or writing, but it might surprise people where you said, this one stays with me. I keep thinking about stuff I learned in that class.
Yes, there is, but I can't remember the name of it. So I took a class from Dr. Pierce that I think had focused on, one of the subjects we talked about was sort of corruption in different systems in Europe. And later on, when I went to law school, I had an opportunity to take a class from another professor on corruption in the law, and it was fascinating. And it's a subject that is always timely and unfortunately is more applicable than one might think. And so I've fondly remember that class over the years, and both the Houghton class and the law school class. And I think one of the things that's sort of another takeaway, Stefan, is that I would be much more willing to just like try things out that I wasn't wholly sure I was interested in, but that kind of intrigued me a little bit. Just try it, Early on in your career is a great time to experiment, and the risk is low, and the reward can be very high because you have your whole career ahead of you, and you don't need to know everything about what you want to do and every job you want to have and every single where you're going to be in 5 years. If I'd ever answered that question, it would always be wrong. I love that about my career. It's taken all sorts of weird twists and turns, and that keeps it interesting and fun, and so it's never boring.
We got time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up, and I know Stephen will hang out and talk with whoever wants to. Who wants to fire that last question?
Would you like to share something about the Attorney General's office in terms of your commitment to justice and civil rights, and how Houghton shaped you and formed you in terms of that?
Sure. One of the reasons I like employment law generally, and it was my sort of employment background that brought me to the Attorney General's office, but it's very people-focused. It's focused on real problems that real people are having today, and it gives you an opportunity to try to address or solve or help them, progress through those problems in a way that usually has a big impact. My employment work is mostly, advising agencies on decisions that impact employees, or that are about employees or have something to do with employees and or best practices or things of that nature. And my civil rights work is mostly bringing cases against businesses that that the Civil Rights Commission has found probable cause to find a violation of like an employment practice law. So those are types of things that that are really important issues that really sort of cut to the heart of people's ability to earn a living and maintain dignity and respect when they go to work. And those are things that are important to me. And I like practicing employment law because it gives me an opportunity to try to do some good in that area. And also, I like my office in particular because part of the job of an attorney general is to seek out justice, which is, arguably a little bit different than a private lawyer job where one of your jobs is to, get your client what they want or achieve some objective that your client wants. And I think one of the cool aspects about practicing government law is that you have the opportunity to think globally about the bigger picture and the stakeholders involved and the impact it will have on different people in a way that you don't always get to do in the private sector. And I mentioned earlier that Houghton College helped me learn how to learn and think about issues from different angles. I think that's a great example of, something that often has complex layers and many sort of aspects to consider. And I think you're doing everyone a disservice if you think about employment law in only one way, sort of in a win-lose mentality. My area of practice is much less winner takes all and much more we have to build a sustainable relationship that lasts and continues to work and ideally be good for everyone involved. So to the extent I can accomplish that in my current job, but it gives me more fulfillment every day.
Hi, Elia, I saw your hand up. Go for it.
I was wondering what else about being a lawyer has made you a better musician? Because you said that the writing correlates, but I was wondering if there was anything else that correlates between the two.
I think writing, sort of the being in front of an audience and having to perform and gauge an audience is important. I think being a good musician requires a lot of discipline and work and focus, and I think the same thing is true about the law. Not all lawyers are good lawyers, and not all lawyers are disciplined, but if you can be disciplined, certainly in your studies and in your practice, I think that's one of the things that makes the difference between a good lawyer and a lawyer.
Stephen, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.